community, a stronger federation would, I think, help everybody. So I want to help them if I can. All right, so we are now live. So today I wanted to talk. My phone is buzzing. Something important. So I want to talk today a little bit more about Chanukah. We all know the basic story, right? That Matityahu fought the Syrian Greeks. Were trying to impose Greek culture on Judaism, and he and his 5 sons fought back, fought a guerrilla war for 3 years. We kicked the Syrians out, and we rededicated the temple from all of the Greek gods that they were worshiping there and sacrificing pigs and whatnot. And the miracle was that the one cruse of oil that was sealed with the seal of the high priest lasted a week, 8 days, and it took that long to create fresh, new kosher oil. So that's the story that we tell our 3rd graders. There's a lot more to it than that, and that's not even accurate. Okay, let's start at the beginning. This happened in the year 168 for the Common Era, so about 170 years before the year 0, and this was the Second Temple era. And there's a lot of things to put this in historical context that we need to understand about the difference between the First Temple era and the Second Temple era. The First Temple stood for 410 years, from the time Solomon built it until the time that it was destroyed by the Babylonians. And in the First Temple, we had prophecy. We had Elijah the prophet. We had Elisha. We had, all of those guys. We had Jeremiah and Isaiah. Prophecy existed in Israel. The Talmud says that in the First Temple, there were 24 miracles that happened every day in the Holy Temple. In the First Temple, we had the Ark of the Covenant with the 2 sets of the 10 Commandments, the broken set and the intact set, the second set, in the Holy of Holies. There were some other things in there as well. There was a little clay jar of manna, as an example of the manna that fell in the desert. Aaron's stick that sprouted almond flowers was in the Holy of Holies in the First Temple, and also the very first Torah written by Moses was in the Holy of Holies of the First Temple. All that disappeared. Those things were cleared out before sacking of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, and of course, with apologies to Steven Spielberg, the question of where the original Ark of the Covenant is still an open question. I have my own theories, but we won't get into that now. We'll do that maybe another time. It's a fascinating subject. Also, in the First Temple period, and this is super important, Israel was independent politically. We had our own kings. Now, there were 2 Jewish states. There was the northern kingdom of Yeravam ben Nevat and the 10 tribes, and there was the lower kingdom of Judah and Benjamin, which were ruled by the kings that derived from David. But we were politically independent. We were our own country. The Second Temple period, by contrast, is much, much different. Most of the Jews after the expulsion to Babylonia really didn't want to come back to Israel. They were very, very comfortable. It was the, America of the ancient world. And it was urban, it was sophisticated, people were making money. There were many, many yeshivas in Babylonia. There were Jewish lifestyle amenities there. And really nobody wanted to go, not too many people wanted to come back to Israel. And so they stayed. So most people stayed. In fact, Ezra, who led most of the Jewish people back to Israel to rebuild the Second Temple, he was very, very upset with the Levites that they didn't come back. And he said, no more tithes to the Levites. He said, from now on, give your tithes to the priests, the Kohanim. And he was very, very embittered that more people didn't come back. A little bit like the same way that Ben Gurion was embittered that after the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, not too many American Jews came. And that's where he's famously known to have said, well, if I can't have the chickens, I'm going to have their golden eggs. And so he began a huge, fundraising campaign in the diaspora, particularly in the United States. And people doing it, they contributed very generously to the state of Israel, but he didn't understand why Jews from America wouldn't come. It was very comfortable here, and it was very hard for people to go to a developing country. In 1950, Israel was a developing country. I asked my father once why you left Israel in 1958 or 59. He said, I was frustrated living in a place where a refrigerator is a luxury, where you don't always have electricity. And that's the way it was back then. It's not today. But in any case, in the Second Temple period, the Jews did not stream back from Babylonia. And the other thing to remember about the Second Temple period is that for almost all of the time that we had the Second Temple, we were under the dominion of other countries. At the beginning, it was Babylonia and Persia, and then later the Seleucid dynasty, and then later the Romans.
Ptolemy before the
Right, the Egyptians, Ptolemy before.
Yeah.
So there was only a period of about 75 years after Shimon, the last son of Mattathiah, became the king, that we had any degree of independence. That did not happen when we rededicated the temple in the Chanukah story. That happened 20 years later. We didn't get our political independence until 20 years after the Chanukah story occurs. A lot of people don't know that. What we did manage to do was rededicate the temple, and we had sort of a détente with the Seleucid dynasty that they wouldn't try to impose their religion on us, but they still ruled the country.
They were the Ptolemies and the Seleucids were the generals of Alexander the Great. When Alexander the Great died, they asked him who should take over his reign, and he said, the strongest should take over my reign. And so they all fought each other.
That's right. There was constant fighting. Alexander was very highly regarded by the Jews. He was very respectful to the Jews in Judaism, which is why to this day people name their children Alexander, is a nod to him. But things went south after he died. He died at a very young age, I think 30 years old. And so the fight for succession began. And the other thing to know about the Second Temple period, which is where our story takes place, is that all of those miracles that happened in the First Temple, gone. There was no Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies. So the Holy of Holies was completely empty for 420 years of the building, while the Second Temple stood. So there was none of that. And the other thing that we need to know about the Second Temple period is that in the First Temple period, we had a stable succession of high priests. In the Second Temple period, particularly the second half, the high priesthood became something that it never was before. First of all, after the Hashmonaim, the Maccabees, they took over political control as well as ecclesiastical control, and they became kings of Israel, and that is a huge, huge problem from the standpoint of Jewish law, because the rulership was supposed to only be in the hands of the descendants of David, who were from the tribe of Judah. The Hashmonaim, the Maccabees, were from the tribe of Levi. They were the priests, and they had no right to rulership. And it only took about 3 generations after Simon, the Maccabee, died, to where his grandsons wound up bickering over succession. And who came in to settle it? The Romans. And from that point on, we were under the dominion of the Roman Empire. The Seleucid Empire was weakening anyway, and the Romans were already a player, but they didn't become the Roman Empire until much later. But by then, Rome was in charge. So the other last point I want to make in terms of the distinction between the First Temple and the Second Temple is that during the First Temple times, we had virtually no impact on the rest of the world. The Holy Temple was there. We had our priests. We had our rituals. We gave the daily offerings. But Israel did not make a huge imprint on the rest of the world, even though we had the presence of God in the First Temple, the Ark of the Covenant, and all these other things that we've described, these daily miracles. We had no influence in the world. In the Second Temple, when we didn't have any of those miracles and God's presence wasn't imminent in the temple, it was a holy building, but it wasn't like the first temple. We had a huge impact on the world. We interacted with Greek philosophers. We interacted with the Roman Empire. Judaism represented a rational alternative to the irrationality of Greco-Roman paganism. And a lot of people converted to Judaism in the Second Temple period. I think I read a historian that said as many as 1 in 7 residents of the Roman Empire were Jews. 1 in 7. So that's a pretty high number. And we've talked before that the nephew of the Roman emperor himself converted to Judaism and he was exiled from Rome. So we had a huge impact in the world when we didn't have all of our tools. When we had our tools, we had no impact. And when we didn't have our tools, we had this huge impact in the world. So this is all sort of by way of background of how we understand the story of Chanukah and the Seleucid Empire and what they were trying to achieve.
One other thing, towards the end of the Hasmonean Empire, there was a queen who ruled Israel.
I think Shlomit Alexandra.
Yeah.
That's right. It
And her rule was one of the best of all.
was very benign. Yes.
But her 2 sons ultimately fought each other.
Aristobulus, and there was another one's name I don't remember at this moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are the ones that fought for succession.
And that was the downfall of the Hasmoneans.
That's great.
Interesting.
It's if you have a strong brother and a weak brother, and they called the Romans in to arbitrate, who were the Romans going to pick to rule? The weak one. And that was the end of it. That was the end of it. But it's very problematic. One of the reasons, by the way, we can talk about this as well. There is a book called the Book of the Maccabees. There's 2 books, actually. It's really one book, but in ancient times, just for printing purposes, like why do we have 2 books of Samuel? Just because it was hard to put it all in one scroll, so they would divide it up. But in the book, why isn't the Book of the Maccabees part of the canon of Jewish of the Torah? Why isn't it in there? We don't discuss it. We don't read it. It isn't like we read the Book of Esther. Any ideas?
Because there was fighting, right? I mean,
Because what?
the sages didn't want the Maccabees to proliferate, to gain control.
Yeah,
No, they're not included in the Bible because the Bible was already sealed.
that's one very good answer.
After the end of the prophets.
Correct.
And there was no more revelation.
True.
But didn't they just kind of wanna just make this a myth and do away with their political?
Here's a dirty little secret about Hanukkah, which is one of the reasons that the rabbis didn't want to emphasize it by, in some way, enshrining the Book of the Maccabees. First of all, the Hashmonaim really embarrassed themselves later. They did a great job at the beginning, but later on, they really did a great disservice to the Jewish people, and we didn't want to glorify what they had done. That's right. The second reason is that really what the story of Hanukkah was about is a civil war.
Oh, war, yeah, that's right.
The Seleucids came in at a later point, and we've talked about this, I think, in class. There always seems to be 3 camps in Judaism. There's the ones who withdraw from the world, like the modern Hasidim. There's the ones on the far left that want to assimilate and adopt foreign ideas into Judaism. And there's always that center, which is centrist Judaism. In Roman times, they were called Pharisees, which is the source of rabbinical Judaism to this day. And the fight was between the traditionalists and those who were pushing Hellenization, adopting Hellenic culture, and forcing us to abandon Torah.
The Sadducees were the Pharisees and the Sadducees around and important during the beginning when Judah Maccabee and they first began fighting the Greeks. Were those 2 there, the Pharisees and Sadducees?
No, that was a little bit later because they were.
Yeah.
There was a famous rabbi named Shimon HaTzadik came after them, and he had 2 students who, after he died, broke away from Judaism. One were the Boethians, and the other was named Sadok. That's where the term Sadducees come from. And essentially, the Sadducees became the gentrified class who were very wealthy, and they were very, very assimilated. That was more in Roman times. It wasn't really in the Greek period. But this general tendency of they may change names and morph, but we've had these three camps in Judaism for over 2,000 years. So we like to consider ourselves in the middle, which is always the most difficult position to maintain. Everybody likes to, it's easy to be all black and white. Working through the fog of the gray is much more challenging intellectually. But yeah, so we had all of that in play. The other thing about the Second Temple is, just to come back to that for a minute, is that Jews were not the majority in the land of Israel anymore. Throughout the Second Temple period, there were sizable populations of people that were living there, not just Jews, unlike the First Temple period. So a lot of different contrasts. And one of the ways, that we distinguish between, for example, Purim and Hanukkah, is that the Purim story, Haman wanted to wipe us all out physically, like the Nazis, like Hamas. I mean, he wanted Jewish blood to run in the streets so there'd be no more Jews left on the planet. The Hellenizers and the Seleucids weren't that way. They were just, you can live. We don't want you to kill you necessarily. Oh, they killed 50,000 Jews in that war. We just want you to adopt our value system. They tried to take away
Our religion.
our religion, right?
Totally, they wanted to kill us by assimilation.
Exactly. Which many argue is what's happening in the United States today.
Yeah.
So what did they ban? Several things. They banned keeping Shabbat, right? Because Sabbath is the ultimate sign of the covenant between the Jewish God and the Jewish people. We say it in our liturgy. Ot Hili Olam. It is a permanent sign of the covenant that we share with God. And they also banned the Sanhedrin from declaring Rosh Chodesh. Why? Rosh Chodesh is the new moon, and in ancient times, the way we would determine the months, we didn't have a calendar on the refrigerator. They would wait for witnesses to run to Jerusalem and say they saw the first sliver of the new moon, and if it was corroborated according to the rules of judicial procedure in Judaism, then that day was declared the first day of the new month. And from that, we can figure out when Passover is. We need to know the first day of the month for Rosh Hashanah. We need to know the first day of the month for Passover.
The calendar is the most important.
Right. Without a calendar, we have no Jewish holidays.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, they abolished Brit Milah, circumcision, because that was offensive to the Greeks, who worshipped not only aesthetics in general, but they worshipped the human form. And so it was all about, pumping iron and being beautiful. And the Spartans, who were part of the Greek culture, they took that to the ultimate extreme, and they killed ugly babies, or they killed the deformed, because they weren't worthy of living because they weren't beautiful. So it was against all that background and backdrop that the Chanukah story happens. And it's true that Mattathias and his 5 sons waged a guerrilla war at the beginning. Mattathias did not last long as he died, and his first son Judah took over the fight, and they conducted a guerrilla war.
Wasn't Judah the third son?
Maybe I thought he was the oldest, but I know Mattathias said, "Follow Judah."
Yeah.
He was the natural leader.
He made another, he was the military head, and he made another son. Shimon, I think, was the political leader.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There was Yonatan, Yochanan, Yehuda, Shimon, and one other. Remember? But anyway, they conducted the war almost single-handedly. But as they began to rack up victories against the Syrian Greeks, more and more people joined the cause. And towards the end, there was a huge outswelling of support for them, and that's how they managed to win the battle that they won. They didn't win the war. That would take 20 more years, but they did win the battle. The question is, you might ask yourself, what's the deal with the cruse of oil that was sealed by the Kohen Gadol, the high priest? Nowhere in Jewish law did it say that the oil used for the menorah in the temple had to be sealed and stamped by the high priest.
Okay,
What's that about? So the only thing that they knew was that the open cruises of oil that they found laying around probably used for idol worship, and we didn't want to use that to serve God. And because it had a tamper-proof seal on it, as it were, we knew that it was safe to use to light the menorah. And there was a debate about whether they should wait to get new oil or whether they should light with what they have. And of course, the decision was made to light with what they had, and that was the miracle of the lights. So the rabbis always wanted to emphasize the miracle of the lights. And if you take a look at our prayers for Hanukkah, there's a noted de-emphasis on the military aspect of the story, because we didn't want it was a very unpleasant thing to
the Civil War, like you
enshrine a
said.
civil
Yeah,
war,
yeah.
Jew fighting Jew.
Mhm.
That's not something that we wanted to elevate or enshrine or protect. Even to this day, not even the most ultra right-wing Orthodox rabbi says, "Oh, we should just excommunicate all the reform." Nobody says that, because nobody wants to take that step. We have substantive differences in philosophy, but we don't want to go down that route. If we've learned anything from October 7th, is that Jewish unity is more important than almost anything else. And the idea is to work together despite our differences, setting our differences aside and finding those areas that we can find common ground and build on those. That's why I invited Rabbi Fleekoff to come dance with us with the Torahs and with that Torah. I invited all the rabbis came. Yes.
So the the miracle of Hanukkah, as you say, became the oil and the lights and that type of thing. But what it was originally about was rededicating the altar.
Correct.
And that was really the important part at the time. I think the lights, I don't know, became cool later on.
You're right. It took a year or two
Yeah.
after the temple was rededicated, and Hanukkah has a dual meaning, right? One is comes from the word of dedicating,
Right.
like we say when somebody builds a new house, when we put up the mezuzah, it's called a Chanukat Habayit. We dedicate the house by putting up the mezuzot in the house, right? But it also means Chanu. They rested Chaf Hey on the 25th day of Kislev, where they actually were able to. They had won. They were able to begin the process of restoring the temple. So there's two ideas there. Yes, you're 100% right. It was all about rededicating the temple and the service and restoring the priestly rituals that we did there every day. We brought a little lamb in the morning and a little lamb at night. Our prayers today, actually our morning and afternoon prayers correspond to those offerings, which we can no longer bring because we don't have a temple to bring them in anymore. It's strictly forbidden to bring any kind of animal offering to God outside the temple precincts. And there's a huge philosophical debate down through the centuries about whether in the third temple the animal sacrifices will be restored or if they will not be restored. And there's arguments to be made on both sides. I won't get into that right now, but that was a very, very important aspect. You're 100% right, because we gained God's favor through the services that we did in the temple. So yes, in fact, another interesting side point on Shabbat morning during the Musaf Kedusha, we say Shema, right? Why? Why there? Because the Seleucid kings put spies in our synagogues. They knew where we say the Shema in the morning, and they banned us from saying it, right? So after the spies had left, then we would say the Shema.
Wow.
It's at the end of the service. It's an interesting point.
Great.
It's just a little trivia thing. I
Well,
like these
that's-
sorts of things, but if you actually count up the number of times we say Shema in the course of the week, it comes out to 32. And the Hebrew 32 is the gematria of the word lev, heart. It's just an interesting little factoid there. But that's why it's inserted there at the end of the service after the spies had left the synagogue.
That's really.
Um, so any questions on all of that?
Yeah, how long was the oil supposed to last? The last
One day, actually half a day.
half day?
They lit, or it was, I think it was enough for one day. The high priest lit the menorah once in the morning and once in the evening.
Okay.
And he probably used half the crews for each time.
And is there any explanation other than a miracle as to why? it
None,
lasted
no
so long?
rational one that I can think of, although, it's funny, even with candles. Um, if you're in an extremely still room, the candles will last much longer than a room that people are in. Because there's no draft. So we have a problem in the sanctuary. We light Shabbat candles there every Friday night, but there's a register for the heating and the cooling that blows. There's not a place in that room where there's not a draft, and the candles don't light very long. By contrast, when we have Shabbat dinner in the Levin auditorium, we light candles in there while we're in shul. We'll light them at 6 o'clock and they'll last till 11 o'clock at night. Because there's no draft. So that's the only rational explanation I can give you. It doesn't explain 8 times the duration of the lighting, but clearly it was a sign of God's favor. So that was sort of that.
Little postscript on guerrilla warfare was I read a few years ago. Guerrilla warfare was the Maccabees was the first ever use of guerrilla warfare, and since then, the study has been made on how they waged guerrilla warfare, and guerrilla warfare since then has been duplicated from what they
Yes.
could learn.
Called asymmetrical war,
Okay,
like where you have a much smaller force that somehow has got to tackle a larger force.
yeah, so it was another
First.
another first.
Yeah. Absolutely. Listen, we dealt with it in Vietnam, and we failed,
Yeah, right.
But fortunately, we're dealing with it more effectively with Hamas,
Yeah, and
and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so if any more questions on all that sort of historical backdrop, if not, let's talk about some general pointers and some rules about Hanukkah. Like everything else in Judaism, we have rules. Things have to be done a certain way for it to be, to fulfill the mitzvah. So let's talk about what some of those rules should be. First of all, let's make a distinction between a menorah and a Chanukiah. A menorah has 7 branches, and that was what was in the temple. Okay. Chanukiah has 9 branches, 8 and 1, and the menorah had 6 and 1. Right. So that's just, in common parlance, we call the Hanukkah menorah, and it's an obvious allusion to the menorah in the temple. But being strictly, being very, exacting about it, what we light on Hanukkah is a Chanukiah. It's not exactly a menorah. So the Chanukiah should have, 8 lights, and the key thing that they should all be in a row. There's a lot of like artistic Chanukiah to have like different levels of the candles, and like that one.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you, Sid. Where they're very pretty, but they're not kosher. And the reason for that, as we're going to see, is that the whole idea of lighting Hanukkah candles is what's called in Aramaic persume nisa, to publicize the miracle that God did for us. So if you have candles on all different levels, a person walking by in the street, if it's in the window, might not be so clear to them what day of Hanukkah it is. So we want them all in a row, where it's very easy to see what night it is. I remember my grandparents had and they must have bought it on one of their trips to Israel. It looked like an oil lamp, and it had 8 candles in it, and on the handle they had a higher one. The thing is, because they were all in a row, it wouldn't be a kosher Chanukiah. It was artistic, the oil lamp, very clever. but it isn't exactly fulfilled mitzvah, you know. So, and that there should be a separate holder for the shamash, the server candle, that's distinct from the other candles. Um, in general, a person should try to prepare the Chanukah during the afternoon so there won't be any delay in lighting at the proper time. Proper time is always from when the three stars come out, when Shabbat would end, when it turns dark, and from there on until most people are off the street. Back in ancient times, they judged it by when people were still in the marketplace. So you want to light it as early at night as possible. You don't want to light it at 1 o'clock in the morning because nobody's on the street and you're not publicizing any miracles to anybody. Nowadays, it's a little bit different because people are out much later. They drive by in their cars. They see things. It's not quite the same. But as we'll see, that's the proper time. It's especially important on Shabbat, on Friday afternoon. Set your candles up early because we always have to light our Hanukkah candles before Shabbat candles. Because once we light our Shabbat candles, it's Shabbat for us in this household, and you can't kindle a flame anymore. So the thing on Friday, of course, is we need to use extra long tapers because it has to last at least a half an hour into the dark. If you calculate it, candle lighting is always 18 minutes before sunset. And sunset usually takes an hour, plus or minus, longer in the summer, shorter in the winter. So you need a candle that lasts at least 90 minutes, the Hanukkah candles on Friday night. We personally makes it so much easier to use the Chanukah the entire holiday that takes those Shabbos candles because they last 3 or 4 hours. Instead of using the little colored ones, which only last about half an hour. But the kids like the little colored ones, but you need a Chanukah that will hold the Shabbat type candles, And this is just me personally. People that design these menorahs, the branches are so close together that the heat from one candle melts the wax on the other. They should be spread apart enough so each candle burns independently. Because when you get to the 8th night, it winds up looking like this, like the middle candles are melting prematurely because of the heat of the other flames that surround them. It's just one of my little pet peeves. I think, people should like product test and think this through a little bit better. I don't know. It's just one of my little things. Anyway, it's important to have the Shabbat candles ready and the Hanukkah candles ready early on Friday because it's so hectic in the minutes leading up to Shabbat. We want to make sure that everything's ready to go. So this is obviously not the case on Saturday. We never prepare anything on Shabbat for after Shabbat, kind of leave Shabbat sacrosanct. We wouldn't set the candles up in advance Saturday afternoon for Saturday night. That would be an exception to that rule. So that's one little bit of the rules. So there's a prayer that we say, we just referenced it, called Al Hanisim, on miracles, that we insert into our Amidot during Hanukkah when we say our silent prayer, and also in Birkat HaMazon when we say grace after meals. And if you happen to forget it, because we're not used to saying it, it doesn't invalidate your prayer. You just go on. If you remember before the end of the Amidah, you can add it at the end. But if you finish your Amidah and you go, oh my gosh, I didn't say Al Hanisim, you don't have to go back and repeat the whole thing. But it's an important, this insertion is important for us to remember what happened there, and how, to me, it's interesting how the rabbis spun that victory, right? It's much more about the victory of the rededicating the temple, and it just glosses over, God fought our fight and vindicated us and put the hands of the mighty in the hands of the weak. You know the text of that, I presume. But it really doesn't go into details about the war, much more about how we rededicated the Holy Temple and how we lit the lights that lasted 8 days. And for all of that, we give praise to God.
Just getting back to the candles, because you mentioned it. So we set up the candles from the right to the left.
Yes,
We light them from the left to the right.
that's the general custom. Yes,
Is there,
it doesn't invalidate it if you did it the other way.
right, is there a reason for that? I think.
So I think, first of all, the reason for lighting them from right, inserting them from right, starting at the right, is because if I'm not mistaken, in ancient times, where did they put the Chanukah?
On, I'm not sure.
In their doorposts of their,
It's like in the front some house, but
right,
there's no window.
opposite the mezuzah.
Okay.
So you're surrounded by mitzvahs,
Okay.
right? As you walk through that door, walk through that portal, you have the Chanukah on one side and the mezuzah on the other side. So you wanted to light the one that was farthest out, closest to the doorpost first, and then in. That was the thinking. Now in Europe, when our ancestors were in Europe, obviously lighting a Chanukah in our doors on our doorposts was impractical in the snow and wind of winter, and it was also somewhat dangerous. So the custom moved from lighting them in the door to perhaps putting them in the window. And even in places in Eastern Europe, because of the Cossacks and the pogroms, even lighting the Chanukah in the window was dangerous. And so the rabbi said, just light it on your kitchen table inside where no one can necessarily see it outside. Um, because you're publicizing the mitzvah, at least to your family. But certainly you shouldn't light Hanukkah candles, which is a rabbinic rule, and put your life, put yourself in physical harm to get beat up or killed because the candelabra is in the window. So it retreated from the door to the window to the kitchen table. I was telling Sheila today, there's not a single window in this synagogue where we can light a
You could do it from the
Hanukkah.
front. Yeah.
And here maybe in Bierman, but in the main building, all the windows are frosted over. It's those old-timey windows from the 50s. Of course, our Chabad friends have a big menorah outside the building. I didn't really have time to get anything like that organized here, but maybe for next year we can light a Chanukiah outside each thing. Also, we say Shachianu, like we do with any mitzvah that we have to do for a while, but only on the first night, of course. And you say both the blessings that we say, and then we light the candles. So that's that. The essential performance of the mitzvah actually is just to light a single candle each night. If someone's incredibly poor and they can't afford 45 candles, which if you calculate it out, it's what it takes to light all 8 nights, and you only can afford 1 candle a night, you fulfill the mitzvah. What we do with adding a candle every night is actually called Hidur mitzvah, where we're beautifying the mitzvah. We're doing it in a very rich and luscious and aesthetically pleasing way. But in the minimum, you can light 1 candle and you're fine. I mentioned in the email that I sent out just an hour ago, we're going to be lighting candles in shul, that it's brought down in Jewish law that you shouldn't light the candles and just get back to work. You should really spend some time, a few minutes, enjoying the candles and reflecting on the miracle, pausing for a minute, muting your phone, and just think about the miracle and enjoy it. So what I'm doing is every day of Hanukkah, I'm sending a little vort in Yiddish. It means just a little nugget of an idea for people to think about as they contemplate their Hanukkah lights. And the first one that I just sent out was the fact that because of Yehudit, who was the daughter of the high priest, she actually seduced one of the Syrian Greek generals who was besieging Jerusalem. She got him drunk, lopped off his head, and they put his head on a pole. And when the Greek soldiers saw that they had lost their leader, they abandoned the siege, and she saved Jerusalem. So because of that, there's a widespread custom for women when the candles are lit that they're supposed to not do any work. They're supposed to kick up their dogs in tribute to the woman who saved the Jewish people. So women aren't supposed to work while the candles are lit. It's not that you're forbidden to, but it's just a nice tribute to the ladies, to the Jewish women, to say thank you.
That have the nerve to lop off a head.
I'm sorry?
Have the nerve to
That's right.
get a
That takes some doing.
lot of courage and strength.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So So that's that. And, obviously the Syrian Greeks forbade us from studying Torah. So it's a particularly nice thing to say something, a word of Torah over, to celebrate our victory over these people that tried to ban it. So as we said, the original place for lighting the Chanukah was outside. Now it's come to being done inside of the windows. I mean, we're safe enough in America, I think, that we can put them in windows. I don't think there's too many. I've not read of any backlash. But yeah, I mean, anti-Semitism is obviously on the rise. But I know most people are pretty comfortable with lighting the candles in the window. How long do they have to last for? Half an hour after dark. That's the rule. So, but obviously, if you want to light them longer, it's better. Like I said, I like to use Shabbos candles. They last 3 or 4 hours. It's nice. But at least half an hour after dark. So fine. So there's a debate about on Saturday night. Should you make Havdalah first and light the Hanukkah candles after, or light the Hanukkah candles first and make Havdalah after? So there's two sides there's two rationales. The first rationale is with Havdalah, you're ending Shabbat. So how can you light candles before you end Shabbat? Right? The other school of thought says, well, actually, technically, you ended Shabbat in the Amidah of Saturday night. You said Vatodienu. Officially, you said the formula for ending Shabbat, even though you haven't done Havdalah yet. And time's a ticking. We got to get these candles lit. It's already dark. So light the Hanukkah candles first and say Havdalah after. Those are the two sides of the coin. What do you think?
I'm in the first camp.
So it's in all things in Judaism, it's a compromise. In shul, we light the Hanukkah candles first and Havdalah second. At home, you do Havdalah first and you light your Hanukkah candles second.
Figure out, how can you make the compromise with that? You should.
Depends on where you are. Okay. The other question is, how many menorahs should you have? The Ashkenazi custom is for everybody in the family to have their own menorah, and in every window in the house, there's another menorah. The Sephardic custom is to have only one for the household. And again, the two sides of that debate is that the Ashkenazim say you're advertising a miracle. You're publicizing a miracle. Do it up. Put a Chanukah in every window. The Sephardic view is no, because the person walking by won't know what night it is. They see so many candles and so many windows, they'll get confused.
Yeah.
Better to have one, so it's very clear what night of Hanukkah it is. So because most of us are of Ashkenazic extraction, light it up. Okay, so that is the story with that. There is an idea of using the Havdalah candle to light the Shamash, light the candles, like to blend the two mitzvahs together. If you can do it, whatever. A few other things is that we say on Friday night of Hanukkah, there's a custom to sing the Chadodi to the tune of Ma'atzor, which is a nice thing to do. The poem itself that we sing Ma'atzor actually has 6 stanzas. Just between you and me and Zoomland, I'm not crazy about that poem. I don't sing all 6 stanzas. The vast majority of people only sing the first one, which is all right. But it goes through Jewish history. It talks about Haman and how he failed to destroy us, and how this one came and that one came. It was written in the 13th century. But it mentions Haman, and it says, Rov banav unichasav talu al ha'etz, which means most of his sons and all of his possessions were hung from a tree. That's the lyric. Now, I know they took poetic license, but Haman's grand piano was hung from a tree. What does that mean? All of his stuff. It's a very weak lyric. You know what I mean? And there are a couple other lyrics in there that are just make me scratch my head. So just singing the first stanza is
Maybe they meant
plenty.
people
Huh?
from the tree.
Well, it says people and his stuff and all of
Yeah,
his
yeah.
possessions.
So, I mean, it's like they were gonna
Yeah,
kill them with,
yeah.
so.
Like, okay, so now here's another thing. On Purim, we have a mitzvah to have a festive meal. There is absolutely no obligation to have a festive meal on Hanukkah. You don't have to have a Hanukkah party. Why? Any ideas? Because our oppressors were hedonists.
Ah,
Wine, women, and song. And so we didn't want to have at least, wine and song and food on a holiday where we're commemorating the defeat of the hedonists, the hedonists. So there is no requirement to have what's called in Hebrew a su'udat mitzvah, a mitzvah kind of party. Although, particularly in the Ashkenazic rabbis, they were like, how can it be that we have this great holiday and we don't eat? We don't celebrate, right? So they said, if nothing else, your Friday night dinner should be part of your Hanukkah celebrations. And the Ramah, who was the decisor of Jewish law for the Ashkenazic world, he says, have a party. Make a Hanukkah party. There's nothing wrong with it, right? So in deference to Rabbi Moshe Isserles, we're having a big Hanukkah party on Monday night at 6:30. It's going to be a lot of fun. Lots of interesting things going to be going on there.
So where do the latkes come in?
That's a really good question. So honestly, it's tied to the miracle of the oil.
oil.
Anything that's fried in oil is considered tasty. That's why
Donuts and,
donuts and what did Europeans have to eat? Eastern Europeans, potatoes, right?
oh, okay.
That's all they ate. My grandfather for the Seder plate, on Karpas, we eat the greens. His family's tradition was to have a boiled potato. And if you think about it, March in Eastern Europe, there was nothing green yet. All they had was potatoes. And there's an old joke about this guy Mendel, who's so poor he goes to work as cleaning the house of the rich guy in town. And the rich guy in town has cheese blintzes brought to his table. And the wafting aromas of the cheese blintzes get to this poor guy, and he's just absolutely obsessed with having a cheese blintz. So he goes home, and he pounds his fist on the table and says, Sarla, I want cheese blintzes. Make me cheese blintzes. And she goes, cheese blintzes? Where are we supposed to get cheese? Where are we supposed to get stuff to make blintzes? We got nothing. So he says, I don't care. I want cheese blintzes. So she goes back in the kitchen and she says, I'll do what I can. So she rolls out some weak little dough, and the only thing they have lying around is potatoes. So she stuffs it with potatoes. In great trepidation, she brings it out to her husband, and he takes a big bite of it, and he says, Sarla, I don't know what the big deal is about cheese blintzes.
Good one.
But that's all they had, right? So they fried potatoes, But anything you fry is good. We're having sort of a meatsy East meets West thing. We're gonna make some fresh falafel balls, and with some toppings, Israeli style toppings. And we're making potato balls, deep fried potato balls instead of like traditional latkes. And people can fight over which one is better.
Okay.
So that's what we're doing. The last point is that on all 8 days of Hanukkah, we say there's a special prayer. It's actually Psalms 113 through 118, that it's called Hallel. And we recite the full Hallel on all 8 days of Hanukkah. We always recite that on either happy occasions or on occasions where a miracle happened. There's a big debate today whether we should say Hallel on Israel Independence Day. Okay, the traditionalists say no. Gemara doesn't mention it. We shouldn't do it. But the Israeli rabbis are like, absolutely, it was an open miracle, the establishment of the state of Israel. So there is a debate about that. But certainly on Hanukkah, like on Purim, we say full hollow. Questions, comments, observations?
Oh, one other thing that about that woman who was the queen of Israel. Supposedly, she instituted the marriage, what's it called? Document,
The ketubah?
the ketubah. And she also instituted schooling for every universal schooling.
I believe that's correct. I believe that's correct. Yeah, also at this time, the rabbinic prohibition of drinking non-kosher wine came into play. It was also around this time, which didn't exist for it prior to that. There was no concern about it. But once we started intermingling with pagans, the Talmud in Avodah Zarah says they used wine as part of their offerings in the pagan temples, the wine libations. And so we wanted to distance ourselves so completely from any kind of paganism that any wine that they used, we wouldn't touch.
And is that when they started making wine a sacred
Well, we
process?
always use wine, but in other words, there was prior to our cross-culturalization with pagans, where there was no concern about,
Oh.
where the wine came from. Once we were interacting with people that used it to worship their false gods, and of course, wine is a very important,
Right.
very important part of the rituals. 'Cause it makes you shikker and, so we didn't want to use anything related to them. I'll tell you a very quick funny story about that. When I was, the Jewish law says this, if there is wine that is, you have a bottle of wine and it is cooked in some way so as to ruin it, then you can drink, you don't have to worry about whether it was touched by a non-Jew or whether it was made by a non-Jew, whatever. And it's in Hebrew, it's called mivushal. And if you look at kosher wine bottles in the back, it will say mivushal or not mivushal.
Oh,
Okay, mivushal means it was brought up to a certain temperature. I don't know what it is. I think 80 degrees centigrade, for a split second. That renders it sort of spoiled. And that way we don't have to worry about any contact with non-Jews touching our wine because it's spoiled, so to speak. Now, better quality kosher wines are not mivushal.
Hmm.
The mediocre quality Jewish wines are mivushal. Although personally, I don't taste much difference. But this funny story is that when I was at Georgetown, I used to go to Mass a lot because I was trying to figure out how a bunch of Jews who thought that Jesus was the Messiah became the Roman Catholic Church as it exists today. And I was very friendly with some of the Jesuit priests who officiated, and I saw that they were using Manischewitz wine for the sacrament in church. And I fell over laughing. I said, like, why are you using kosher wine? They said, well, we feel like it brings us closer to the Jewish roots of the Catholic faith. But what they don't understand is that they're using wine that was specifically ruined, so it wouldn't be used for pagan services in pagan service. And the irony was lost to everyone but me, of course, but it was very, very funny.
and indeed, it was.
Yeah, well, yeah.
My way of thinking, but
Yes, there's a debate about, first, whether Roman Catholicism is considered paganism or not. It's a huge debate amongst the rabbis. Basically, the fault line is whether you lived in Catholic countries or if you didn't. If you lived in Catholic countries, you had to tread carefully. If you lived in a Muslim country, then for sure. The Rambam does say that Roman Catholicism was a form because of the statuary.
Yeah.
And all of that. But in any case, I want to wish everybody a happy Chanukah. I hope this was fun. Next week, we'll get back on our philosophy train and start talking about the intersection between science and Torah. I
great.
think you'll find it very, very interesting.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Rabbi.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. Hopefully we'll see you all this evening. Oh, Dan. Shalom Aleichem. Can you hear me? All right. We'll talk soon.
Alechem Shalom. Sorry, I couldn't unmute.
Okay. So I hope
Okay.
you enjoyed that. I didn't realize you joined us. That's great, Dan. Good to have you.
Sure, I enjoyed it more than you.
Chanukah Sameach.
Chanukah Sameach, kol tov,
להתראות.
להתראות.